The strangest thing about honesty is that sometimes it costs more than stealing. Ethan Johnson did not know who had said those words first. He had heard them years ago from an old man who used to sleep near the bus station, and on that cold evening they returned to him as he walked beneath the fading glow of streetlights. The city was settling into night. Storefront signs reflected off wet pavement left behind by a brief afternoon rain. Cars rushed past, their headlights stretching across the sidewalk like ribbons of white light. Ethan pulled his thin jacket tighter around his shoulders and adjusted the worn backpack hanging from one arm. At 14 years old, he had learned how to ignore hungry stomachs, cold nights, and the uncomfortable stares of strangers. What he never learned was how to stop caring about doing the right thing. The smell of gasoline drifted from a nearby intersection. A city bus groaned to a stop. People stepped off carrying shopping bags and briefcases before disappearing into the evening crowd. Ethan moved carefully along the sidewalk, scanning the ground the way he always did. Sometimes people dropped spare change. Sometimes unopened snacks. Sometimes nothing at all. Then something caught his eye. Near the edge of the curb, partially hidden beneath a newspaper, sat a dark leather wallet. Ethan stopped walking. For a moment he simply stared at it. Traffic hummed around him. A siren echoed somewhere far away. Slowly he bent down and picked it up. The leather felt expensive. Heavy. Well-made. He looked around. Nobody seemed to be searching for anything. Nobody appeared concerned. The crowd continued moving as if the wallet did not exist. Ethan swallowed hard. He knew what most people would expect a homeless kid to do. Sell it. Take the cash. Disappear. Nobody would know. Nobody would care. His fingers tightened around the wallet before he finally opened it. The sight made his eyes widen. Neatly stacked $100 bills filled one compartment. There had to be thousands of dollars inside. More money than Ethan had ever held in his life. For a brief second his imagination betrayed him. A warm hotel room. New clothes. Hot meals. A bed. That did not disappear every morning. The vision lasted only a moment before reality returned. Ethan looked deeper inside the wallet. Several credit cards. Business cards. A driver's license. The photo belonged to a man named Bradley Morgan. Ethan stared at the name. Even he recognized it. Morgan Development Group. Luxury hotels. Office towers. Television interviews. The kind of person whose picture appeared in newspapers. Ethan slowly closed the wallet. The wind pushed a loose newspaper across the sidewalk. Somewhere nearby, laughter spilled from a restaurant patio. He looked once more at the thick stack of cash before sliding the wallet carefully into his backpack. "It is not mine," he whispered to himself. Then he started walking. The city lights reflected in puddles beneath his feet, as he followed the address listed on one of the business cards. He had no idea what would happen when he arrived. He only knew he was going. Above him the clouds drifted across the night sky. Ahead, beyond rows of expensive buildings glowing with warm light, waited a meeting that would change far more than either Ethan Johnson or Bradley Morgan could possibly imagine. Ethan Johnson approached the grand address listed on the card with a mixture of hesitation and determination. The street was quiet, the night still heavy with the distant hum of traffic, and the glow from street lamps reflected softly on puddles from an earlier rain. He adjusted his backpack, the wallet secured safely inside, and took a deep breath before stepping onto the wide stone steps leading up to the luxurious townhouse. Bradley Morgan had been pacing inside, the weight of the missing wallet already gnawing at him, unaware that the solution was about to arrive at his doorstep in the form of a young boy he had never noticed before. The doorman eyed Ethan suspiciously as he reached the front door, noting the worn jacket and the careful but alert way he moved. Ethan knocked lightly, then stepped back, his small figure illuminated by the warm porch light. Moments later the door opened, revealing Bradley, tall, impeccably dressed, exuding confidence and authority, yet the expression on his face flickered between annoyance and curiosity as he saw the boy standing there with an honest, almost timid demeanor. Ethan held out the wallet with both hands, his posture straight, eyes meeting Bradley's, conveying a silent message of integrity. Bradley blinked, surprised by the courage and composure in someone so young and clearly from a very different world than his own. Around them the polished hardwood floors, modern decor, and muted lighting created a stark contrast to the streets Ethan had walked, highlighting the gulf of experiences between the two. Bradley's aides lingered in the background, uncertain how to react, while Ethan's own heartbeat seemed louder in the quiet foyer. The moment stretched, suspended between the boy's quiet honesty and the man's initial disbelief, each reading the other with unspoken awareness. Ethan's gaze did not waver, even as Bradley's eyes darted to the stack of bills peeking from the wallet, a tangible sign of wealth that could have tempted anyone less principled. A subtle shift occurred in the room as Bradley realized that the choice to return the wallet was not accidental or naive. It was deliberate, guided by character that could not be measured in money or status. The soft hum of the air conditioning and the faint city sounds outside framed the tension and potential for change. Bradley cleared his throat, unsure of what to say, while Ethan, sensing the gravity of the encounter, offered a small, respectful nod, waiting for acknowledgement rather than reward. In that instant, the narrative of power and expectation began to bend, the rules of who is respected and who is overlooked subtly rewritten. The city outside remained indifferent, but inside the foyer, a new story had begun, one of moral courage, integrity, and the quiet strength of a boy whose world had been small but whose actions were about to make a ripple far larger than he had imagined. Ethan stood quietly in the lavish foyer, his small hand still holding the wallet as Bradley Morgan studied him with a mix of disbelief and curiosity. The soft glow from modern pendant lights illuminated the polished wood floors and the elegant furniture around them, reflecting the stark contrast between Ethan's worn jacket and the pristine surroundings. Outside, faint city noises drifted in through large windows, cars passing on empty streets, the hum of distant sirens, while inside, tension hung thick like the scent of polished wood and faint cologne. Bradley's eyes lingered on Ethan's steady gaze, noticing the quiet confidence and honesty in the boy's posture, the way he refused to flinch or look away despite the social gap that seemed impossible to bridge. The air between them pulsed with anticipation, the subtle creak of the floorboards beneath Bradley's shoes punctuating the silence. Ethan shifted slightly, careful not to fidget, taking in the height of the ceilings, the artwork on the walls, the faint sound of a clock ticking somewhere in the background. Bradley reached out to take the wallet, his fingers brushing briefly against Ethan's, an unspoken acknowledgement passing between them, a silent recognition that this boy had chosen integrity over temptation. The weight of the moment pressed against the walls of the foyer, every item in the room, vases, framed photographs, luxurious rugs, bearing witness to an unexpected moral confrontation. Bradley's expression softened, the first flicker of respect appearing in his eyes as he examined the contents of the wallet, noting the meticulous organization, the care with which the money and cards were kept, and the boy's deliberate choice to do the right thing. Ethan's own heartbeat seemed to synchronize with the subtle shifting of Bradley's stance, each waiting for the other to speak, each aware that a simple exchange had the power to redefine perceptions and assumptions about honesty, wealth, and social divides. A faint breeze from a slightly open window carried the scent of night air and distant rain, mixing with the rich indoor aromas, grounding Ethan in the moment as he stood tall, calm, and composed. Bradley finally cleared his throat, his voice steady but tinged with astonishment, realizing that this brief encounter held more meaning than the loss of a wallet could ever convey. The soft lighting, the distant city sounds, the polished surroundings, and the young boy's unwavering gaze combined into a cinematic tableau of human virtue standing firm against assumptions, setting the stage for the transformative events that were about to unfold as the story of honesty, courage, and unexpected recognition continued to build. Bradley Morgan finally broke the silence, but the words that came out were not the gratitude Ethan expected. Instead, they carried the sharp edge of suspicion that often follows privilege when it encounters something it does not understand. Bradley glanced from the wallet to Ethan and then back again, his eyes narrowing slightly. The warmth that had briefly appeared on his face seemed to retreat behind years of caution and habit. "You found this on the street?" he asked. Ethan nodded once. "Near the bus station." Bradley looked at the thick stack of cash again. One of the men standing behind him folded his arms. Another exchanged a glance with the doorman. The atmosphere shifted almost imperceptibly. Ethan felt it immediately. He had felt it before in stores, on sidewalks, and in restaurants where people looked at him longer than necessary. The feeling was familiar. The assumption that someone like him could not possibly be the good guy in the story. The chandelier above cast soft golden light across the foyer, but somehow the room felt colder than it had a moment earlier. Bradley slowly counted through the bills. The rustling paper sounded unusually loud. Ethan stood patiently, keeping his hands at his sides. He knew what was happening. Bradley was checking to make sure nothing was missing. The realization did not anger him. It simply disappointed him. Outside, a gust of wind rattled the branches of a nearby tree against the window. Inside, nobody spoke. The seconds stretched. Finally, Bradley finished counting. Every dollar was there. Every card. Every document. Nothing had been touched. One of the assistants looked genuinely surprised. The other shifted awkwardly and glanced toward Ethan. Bradley stared at the wallet for another moment before slipping it into his jacket pocket. "Everything is here," he said quietly. Ethan simply nodded. He had never expected applause. He had only wanted to return what belonged to someone else. Bradley reached into his pocket and pulled out several $100 bills. The crisp notes caught the light as he extended them forward. "Take this," he said. "You earned it." Ethan looked at the money but did not move. For a moment nobody understood why. Then the boy shook his head. "No, sir." Bradley blinked. "No." Ethan offered a small smile. "I did not return it for that." The room fell silent again. This time the silence felt different. One assistant lowered his eyes. The doorman shifted his weight. Bradley remained perfectly still. Ethan's answer seemed to unsettle him more than the missing wallet ever had. The boy standing before him owned almost nothing. His jacket was worn. His shoes were scuffed. His backpack looked older than he was. Yet somehow he had refused an amount of money that many people would have accepted without hesitation. Ethan glanced toward the door. The warmth from inside contrasted with the cool night waiting outside. "I should go," he said politely. Bradley opened his mouth as if searching for words, but none arrived. For perhaps the first time in years, a business deal, a negotiation, or a financial calculation could not help him understand the situation in front of him. Ethan turned and walked toward the exit. The polished floor reflected his silhouette beneath the chandelier light. Just before reaching the door, he paused and looked back. "I hope you have a good night, sir." Then he stepped outside. The cold evening air wrapped around him immediately. Behind him, the mansion remained brightly lit. Ahead, the city stretched into darkness and uncertainty. Ethan adjusted his backpack and started walking. He did not notice Bradley standing motionless behind the glass door, watching him disappear down the sidewalk. And he certainly did not know that the conversation inside that house would continue long after he was gone, planting the first seeds of a decision that would bring an entire convoy of vehicles to his world before the next morning was over. The city was quieter by the time Ethan reached the abandoned bus shelter where he often spent the night. A cold breeze moved through the empty streets, carrying the distant scent of rain and traffic. He sat on a worn bench and placed his backpack beside him. The events of the evening replayed in his mind, not because he expected anything to come from them, but because something about the encounter felt unfinished. Above him, clouds drifted slowly across the sky, occasionally revealing small patches of moonlight. Around him, the city continued its endless rhythm. A delivery truck rolled through an intersection. A neon sign flickered above a closed diner. Somewhere in the distance, a train horn echoed through the darkness. Ethan pulled his jacket tighter and rested his head against the cool metal wall behind him. Across town, however, Bradley Morgan had not gone to bed. The image of the boy standing in his foyer refused to leave his thoughts. He sat alone in his study, surrounded by shelves filled with awards, photographs, and business accomplishments accumulated over decades. Yet none of them seemed capable of answering the question now occupying his mind. Why would a boy with almost nothing refuse money that could have changed his immediate circumstances? The soft glow from a desk lamp illuminated the wallet resting beside him. Bradley stared at it again. Every dollar remained untouched. Every card exactly where it belonged. He thought about the hesitation he had seen in Ethan's eyes when the wallet was first handed over. Not the hesitation of guilt. The hesitation of someone choosing between need and principle. The realization settled heavily in the room. Bradley leaned back in his chair and exhaled slowly. For years he had built companies by evaluating risk, opportunity, and motivation. He believed he understood people. Yet somehow a 14-year-old boy had challenged assumptions he did not even realize he carried. Near midnight, Bradley summoned 2 trusted associates. They arrived within the hour. The conversation that followed stretched deep into the night. Questions were asked. Information was gathered. Addresses were checked. Security footage from nearby businesses was reviewed. The more Bradley learned, the more unsettled he became. Ethan had no permanent home. No family waiting for him. No hidden advantage. He had simply found a wallet full of money and chosen honesty. Meanwhile, Ethan drifted to sleep beneath the shelter's dim light, unaware of any investigation taking place. His dreams were simple. A warm meal. A safe place to stay. A future that felt less uncertain than the present. Dawn arrived slowly. Pale sunlight began creeping across rooftops and empty streets. Delivery drivers started their routes. Coffee shops unlocked their doors. Birds settled on telephone wires. Ethan woke to the familiar sounds of the city stretching into a new day. He rubbed his eyes and collected his backpack. To him, this morning seemed no different from countless others. He had no reason to expect change. No reason to imagine that dozens of conversations had occurred while he slept. No reason to suspect that powerful people were now searching for him. As the first rays of sunlight reflected off downtown office towers, Bradley stood beside a large window overlooking the city. Below him, engines started. Drivers received instructions. Phones rang. Plans were finalized. Somewhere beyond the skyline, a homeless boy was beginning an ordinary morning. But before this day was over, nothing about his life would feel ordinary again. The morning sun had barely cleared the tops of the downtown buildings when Ethan Johnson began walking his usual route. The city felt different at that hour. Sidewalks were less crowded. Store owners swept their entrances. The smell of fresh coffee drifted from corner cafes. Delivery trucks rolled through intersections carrying supplies for businesses preparing to open. Ethan adjusted his backpack and headed toward a small community center where volunteers sometimes served breakfast. His thoughts remained simple. Find something to eat. Stay warm. Make it through another day. He had no idea that across the city, dozens of people were already searching for him. Near the community center, a group of elderly residents sat outside talking beneath a covered pavilion. A few recognized Ethan and greeted him warmly. He smiled back and continued walking. Then something unusual caught his attention. At first it was only a distant sound. Engines. Lots of them. Deep, synchronized, expensive. Engines unlike the ordinary traffic that filled the streets every morning. Several people nearby looked up. Others turned toward the main road. The sound grew louder. Ethan stopped beside a crosswalk and squinted into the distance. Around the corner came the first black SUV. Then another. Then another. The vehicles moved slowly, almost like a formal procession. Their polished surfaces reflected the bright morning sunlight. Residents stepped outside shops and restaurants to watch. Conversations stopped. Phones appeared in hands as people recorded videos. By the time the 10th SUV passed, curiosity had spread across the entire block. Ethan stood frozen, watching the convoy continue. 15. 16. 17. More vehicles appeared. 20 in total. The line stretched nearly the entire length of the street. The scene looked less like something from everyday life and more like a moment from a movie. Children pointed excitedly. Business owners stepped onto sidewalks. Even drivers paused to stare. Finally, the lead SUV slowed and pulled to the curb directly across from Ethan. The remaining vehicles followed behind it in perfect sequence. Silence settled over the crowd. The engines switched off one by one. The sudden quiet felt almost unreal. Ethan glanced around, assuming someone important must be arriving. He certainly did not imagine any connection to himself. Then the driver's door opened. A sharply dressed man stepped out. Another followed from the passenger side. Behind them, more professionally dressed individuals emerged from the convoy. They looked around carefully before focusing on one person. Ethan. Confusion spread across his face. He looked behind him to see if someone else stood there. There was nobody. The first man approached with a respectful expression. "Are you Ethan Johnson?" he asked. Ethan hesitated before nodding. Several people in the crowd exchanged surprised looks. The man smiled slightly. Mr. Morgan has been looking for you. The name immediately caught Ethan's attention. His heartbeat quickened. Around him, whispers rippled through the growing crowd. Residents watched closely. Some recognized the name. Others simply sensed something extraordinary unfolding. Ethan glanced at the long row of luxury vehicles, then back at the man standing before him. The morning sunlight reflected off the windows of the SUVs, creating flashes of light across the street. For the first time since finding the wallet, Ethan began to realize that his decision might have created consequences far larger than he ever expected. And somewhere inside the lead vehicle, waiting quietly behind tinted glass, Bradley Morgan was preparing to step out and change the course of Ethan's life forever. Bradley Morgan finally stepped out of the lead SUV. The morning sunlight reflected off the dark vehicle behind him, casting long shadows across the sidewalk. Conversations around the street faded almost instantly. People who had been recording videos lowered their phones slightly. Others simply stared. Ethan stood motionless near the curb, his backpack hanging from one shoulder, trying to understand why one of the most recognizable businessmen in the city had arrived with an entire convoy looking for him. Bradley adjusted his jacket and walked forward without the confidence he usually carried into boardrooms and corporate meetings. There was something different in his expression now. The sharp certainty Ethan had seen the previous night had been replaced by reflection. The crowd parted naturally as Bradley approached. The sound of distant traffic blended with the fluttering of flags outside nearby storefronts. Somewhere a coffee machine hissed from an open cafe door. Ordinary life continued around them, yet the moment itself felt suspended outside of time. Ethan watched carefully. He was not afraid, but he was cautious. Experience had taught him that attention from powerful people did not always bring good news. Bradley stopped a few feet away. For several seconds neither spoke. The city noise seemed to disappear. The only sound Ethan noticed was the faint rustling of leaves overhead as a breeze moved through the trees lining the street. Bradley looked directly at the boy. "I owe you an apology," he said. The words surprised everyone within earshot. Several people exchanged confused glances. Ethan blinked once, unsure he had heard correctly. Bradley continued. "Last night, when you returned my wallet, I should have thanked you immediately. Instead, I questioned you. I looked at your circumstances before I looked at your character." Ethan remained quiet. Bradley's voice carried no trace of performance. There were no reporters present. No cameras arranged for publicity. The sincerity in his tone was unmistakable. "I spent most of the night thinking about what happened," Bradley said. "Then I spent the morning learning more about you." Ethan lowered his eyes briefly. The attention made him uncomfortable. He was not used to being the center of anything. Around them, residents listened closely. Some nodded. Others appeared visibly moved. Bradley glanced toward the row of SUVs before looking back at Ethan. "You had every reason to keep that wallet," he said. "Many people would have. Nobody would have known. But you returned it anyway." Ethan finally spoke. "It belonged to you." The simplicity of the answer seemed to affect Bradley more than any speech could have. A faint smile appeared on Ethan's face. Not pride. Not excitement. Just the quiet certainty of someone who believed honesty was normal, even when the world treated it like something extraordinary. Bradley took a slow breath. The morning sunlight illuminated the street around them, warming the concrete and reflecting from the windows of nearby buildings. "I would like you to come with me today," Bradley said. "There is something important I want to show you." Ethan looked uncertain. The crowd watched with anticipation. The line of black SUVs stretched behind Bradley like a symbol of a world completely different from Ethan's own. Yet for the first time, that distance no longer felt impossible. Somewhere deep inside, Ethan sensed that the choice he had made on a rainy sidewalk the night before was about to open a door he never imagined existed. The convoy of black SUVs wound through the city streets, engines humming like a coordinated heartbeat, each vehicle gleaming in the early morning sun, reflecting off glass buildings and casting long, shifting shadows on the sidewalks. Ethan Johnson walked alongside Bradley Morgan, eyes wide as he took in the organized procession and the weight of the attention around him. Pedestrians paused mid-step, their conversations halting, some craning their necks for a better look, as the two men advanced toward a sleek modern office tower at the heart of the downtown district. Bradley spoke calmly, his voice measured, explaining to Ethan the significance of the buildings, the investments, and the history behind the skyline they now traversed. Yet every word seemed secondary to the silent acknowledgement of Ethan's integrity and the profound choice he had made the night before. The street reflected a dance of light across polished chrome as delivery vans and taxis cautiously navigated around the convoy, creating a cinematic corridor that seemed to spotlight Ethan in an almost unreal clarity. Inside the lobby, sunlight filtered through floor-to-ceiling windows, highlighting the smooth marble floors and minimalist decor. The space felt monumental, yet human in scale, echoing the careful thought Bradley had poured into constructing both his empire and the way he treated those who impacted his life. Ethan's sneakers squeaked softly against the polished floors as he followed Bradley to an elevator bank, the soft hum of conversation and footsteps blending with distant city sounds, creating a textured soundscape that underscored the gravity of the moment. The elevator doors slid open, and they stepped into a glass cage ascending silently, the city falling away beneath them in a patchwork of rooftops, streets, and tiny figures moving like clockwork. Bradley gestured to the windows, pointing out locations tied to various philanthropic projects, schools, and community centers, while Ethan absorbed the panorama in reflective silence, noting the contrast between the towering structures and the vulnerable neighborhoods below, each detail reinforcing the idea that choices, both large and small, could ripple outward in ways not immediately visible. The elevator reached its destination, opening onto a private executive floor where natural light bounced off polished wood and steel, creating a warm yet disciplined atmosphere. Bradley motioned for Ethan to look at a wall lined with photographs, documents, and small mementos. Each item told a story of people impacted, lives changed, opportunities created. Ethan's attention lingered on a simple plaque dedicated to a community initiative, a quiet reminder that integrity and kindness could coexist with success and influence. Bradley's gaze softened as he watched Ethan absorb the scene, aware that the boy's actions had already demonstrated the principles behind every photo and document. Outside, sunlight glinted off neighboring skyscrapers, casting fleeting patterns across the polished floors, while inside, the subtle smell of fresh wood and paper mingled with the faint aroma of brewing coffee, grounding the extraordinary moment in human reality. Bradley finally spoke, his tone both instructive and appreciative, conveying the gravity of what Ethan had done and the potential that lay ahead, not in wealth alone, but in choices guided by character. Ethan listened carefully, realizing that the events of the last 24 hours had irrevocably altered the trajectory of his life, bridging worlds that had once felt impossibly distant, and planting seeds of understanding, respect, and opportunity that would shape the coming days. The executive floor overlooked nearly the entire city, and for several minutes Ethan stood silently beside the massive windows, absorbing a view he had only ever seen in photographs. The streets below appeared smaller from that height, yet he recognized many of them. He could trace the route he walked most mornings. He could see the bus station where he often spent nights. The contrast settled heavily in his chest. Bradley Morgan watched him quietly, understanding that the view represented more than architecture. It represented distance, opportunity, possibility. Sunlight poured through the glass, illuminating framed photographs that lined the walls. Ethan moved slowly from one display to another. Some photographs showed schools. Others showed community centers, scholarship ceremonies, and youth programs. Each image captured people whose lives had changed because someone had invested in their future. Bradley stopped in front of a photograph showing a group of teenagers, standing proudly beside a newly opened learning center. Most people think success is about buildings, he said. But buildings are only useful when they help people. Ethan studied the faces in the picture. They looked confident, hopeful, the kind of expressions he rarely saw among kids struggling to survive. Bradley continued walking, eventually leading Ethan into a large conference room. The polished table stretched almost the entire length of the room. Floor-to-ceiling windows filled the space with warm natural light. Several executives were already waiting. When Ethan entered, every person stood. The gesture caught him off guard. Nobody had ever stood up because he entered a room. He instinctively looked behind him, wondering if someone more important was arriving. There was nobody else. Bradley noticed the confusion and smiled slightly. "They are standing for you." Ethan felt heat rise to his face. The executives greeted him respectfully. Some shook his hand. Others thanked him directly for his honesty. One woman explained that the story of the wallet had spread throughout the company overnight. Another executive admitted he was struggling to understand how a 14-year-old boy facing such difficult circumstances could choose integrity so naturally. Ethan listened quietly. He did not know how to explain it. To him, returning the wallet had never felt extraordinary. Simply felt right. The conversation shifted toward education. Bradley asked about school. Ethan hesitated before answering honestly. He explained how difficult it had become to attend consistently without stable housing. He described carrying his belongings from place to place. He talked about studying whenever he could find a quiet corner. As he spoke, the room grew increasingly silent. The executives exchanged glances. For the first time, they were not looking at a homeless boy. They were looking at potential. Bradley leaned forward slightly. "What do you want most?" The question surprised Ethan. Nobody had asked him that in a very long time. He stared briefly at the sunlight reflecting across the conference table. Then he answered softly, "I want a chance." The simplicity of the response seemed to affect everyone present. Bradley nodded slowly, not because the answer was dramatic but because it was honest. Outside the windows, the city continued its daily routine. Cars moved through intersections. People hurried along sidewalks. Life carried on as usual. Yet inside that conference room, something important had changed. For the first time, powerful people were not discussing Ethan's problems. They were discussing his future. And as the afternoon light deepened into a warm golden glow, Bradley Morgan quietly began putting a plan into motion that would transform a single act of honesty into an opportunity capable of changing an entire life. The meeting ended, but nobody rushed to leave. The executives remained seated, quietly discussing possibilities while Ethan stood near the window overlooking the city below. The afternoon sunlight had softened into a rich golden glow that painted the glass towers outside with shades of amber and bronze. For the first time in a long time, Ethan allowed himself to imagine a future beyond the next meal or the next place to sleep. Yet even now he remained cautious. Life had taught him that hope could disappear as quickly as it arrived. Bradley Morgan seemed to sense that hesitation. He walked over and stood beside him, looking out at the same skyline. "When I was your age," Bradley said quietly, "someone gave me a chance I did not deserve yet. They saw potential before I had proven anything. That opportunity changed my life." Ethan listened without speaking. The city stretched endlessly below them. Tiny cars moved through intersections. Sunlight flashed across distant windows. Somewhere far beneath their feet, people hurried through ordinary afternoons, unaware of the conversation taking place high above them. Bradley turned toward him. "I think it is time somebody does the same for you." Ethan felt his heartbeat quicken. Around the room, several executives exchanged small smiles. One woman opened a folder and placed it on the conference table. Another slid a document beside it. Bradley motioned for Ethan to join them. As he approached, the polished wood reflected the warm afternoon light, creating a calm atmosphere that somehow made everything feel more real. Bradley explained each step carefully. Temporary housing, educational support, access to tutors, medical care, transportation. Most importantly, enrollment assistance to help Ethan return to school full-time without worrying about where he would sleep each night. Ethan stared at the documents. The words seemed almost impossible to process. He had spent so much energy surviving that he had rarely allowed himself to dream beyond survival. The room remained quiet as he absorbed everything. Finally he looked up. "Why are you doing this?" The question lingered in the air. Bradley smiled faintly. "Because character matters." He paused. "And because last night you reminded me of something I had forgotten." Ethan lowered his eyes briefly. The answer felt sincere. Not charity. Not pity. Respect. The distinction mattered. Outside the windows, clouds drifted slowly across the sky. The sunlight shifted, creating moving patterns across the conference table. Bradley continued. "There is another reason." He glanced toward the executives. "Tomorrow evening we are hosting a foundation event. Community leaders, business owners, educators, and donors will all be there." Ethan immediately looked uncomfortable. Bradley noticed. "I am not asking you to give a speech." A few people laughed softly. I simply want them to meet you. Ethan thought about the crowd that had gathered around the SUVs that morning. He thought about the attention, the questions, the stares. Part of him wanted to retreat back into anonymity. Yet another part understood that something bigger was happening. Bradley was not trying to showcase a success story. He was trying to show people what integrity actually looked like. As the afternoon slowly faded toward evening, paperwork remained untouched on the table while conversations continued. They talked about school subjects, favorite books, dreams, obstacles. For the first time, powerful people were listening to Ethan instead of talking about him. And as the last golden rays of sunlight stretched across the room, Bradley realized that the greatest investment he had made all year was not in a company, building, or a project. It was in a 14-year-old boy whose honesty had reminded an entire room what real wealth looked like. The evening air carried the faint scent of fresh pavement and blooming magnolias as Ethan stepped out of the building with Bradley Morgan at his side. The streets below shimmered with reflections from the glass towers catching the last light of sunset, and for a brief moment, Ethan felt like he was seeing the city from a completely new perspective, not as a place to survive, but as a place full of possibilities. Bradley led him toward the line of black SUVs waiting at the curb, their engines purring quietly, the reflections dancing across the polished surfaces. Ethan's pulse quickened. Memories of nights sleeping under awnings and hopping buses to stay dry surfaced, reminding him how unusual this moment was. A gentle nudge from Bradley brought him back to the present. Relax, Bradley said, voice calm yet encouraging. You have already earned this. Ethan nodded, swallowing hard. As they approached the first SUV, a cluster of executives and community leaders greeted them, and Ethan could feel the weight of their attention. Yet it was different, warm, expectant, curious, not judgmental. The young boy who had returned the lost wallet was now walking among grown men and women, who understood that his honesty had revealed character they wanted to support. Bradley opened the door for Ethan, gesturing toward the passenger seat. Go on, he said, smiling faintly. We'll start showing them what integrity looks like. Inside, the cabin was quiet except for the low hum of the air conditioning and the occasional click of seatbelts. Ethan looked out the window and saw his reflection in the tinted glass. A boy who had lived on the margins, now thrust momentarily into the spotlight. He remembered the wallet in his hand, the choice he had made, and the ripple that had followed. The people outside had been waiting, watching, hoping. Now they were about to meet the person behind the story. As the vehicle began moving through the streets toward the event, Ethan's hands rested lightly in his lap. He thought about the neighborhoods he had walked through, the children who played in alleys, the small victories of honesty that often went unnoticed. Bradley glanced at him from the driver's seat, reading the mixture of apprehension and wonder in his expression. This is not about you proving anything, Bradley said gently. It's about them understanding how one choice can inspire many. Ethan nodded silently, feeling the weight of responsibility not as a burden but as a kind of permission. Permission to dream, to act, and to show the world that character mattered more than circumstance. The streetlights began to glow, illuminating the paths and reflecting in the puddles from a recent rain. He watched people moving along sidewalks, some hurrying home, others simply pausing to watch the city lights flicker. In that quiet reflection, he realized that the journey from returning a lost wallet to this moment was not just a story of chance but of choices, of honesty, of unseen decisions that led to recognition and opportunity. The SUVs rolled steadily onward, carrying Ethan into a future he had scarcely dared to imagine, yet for the first time he felt ready, and the city seemed to stretch endlessly before him, full of possibility, full of light, full of quiet promise that one person's honesty could touch countless lives. The foundation event occupied the top floor of a historic building overlooking the river, where hundreds of warm lights reflected across the water and transformed the evening into something almost dreamlike. As the convoy arrived, guests dressed in business attire and formal wear moved through the entrance, their conversations blending into a soft background hum. Ethan stepped from the SUV and paused briefly. The cool evening air carried the scent of the river mixed with fresh flowers arranged along the entrance walkway. Everything felt unfamiliar, yet somehow less intimidating than he had expected. Bradley walked beside him, not as a businessman escorting a guest, but as a mentor guiding someone toward a future neither of them had anticipated only 24 hours earlier. Inside, the ballroom glowed beneath crystal chandeliers. Glass walls revealed the city skyline stretching into the distance, each illuminated building standing against the dark blue evening sky. Conversations gradually slowed as guests noticed Bradley entering with Ethan. Curious glances followed them through the room. Some people had already heard fragments of the story. Others knew nothing at all. Ethan felt the attention immediately but remembered Bradley's words from earlier. He did not need to prove anything. He only needed to be himself. Soft piano music drifted through the room as servers moved quietly between tables. Bradley greeted community leaders, educators, and donors, introducing Ethan whenever someone approached. To Ethan's surprise, people listened carefully when he spoke. They asked about school. They asked about his interests. They asked about his dreams. Nobody asked where he had slept the night before. Nobody focused on what he lacked. For the first time, people seemed interested in who he was rather than the circumstances surrounding him. The realization settled gently in his chest. After some time, Bradley stepped onto the stage positioned near the windows overlooking the river. The room gradually fell silent. Hundreds of faces turned toward him. The city lights sparkled beyond the glass behind him. Ethan remained near one of the tables, unsure what was about to happen. Bradley adjusted the microphone and looked across the audience. "Tonight," he began, "I plan to speak about investment, opportunity, and community." He paused briefly. "But yesterday I received a lesson far more valuable than any speech I could give." The room listened attentively. Bradley then shared the story. Not dramatically, not for applause. Simply and honestly. He described losing his wallet. He described the boy who found it. He described the decision to return it untouched despite every hardship that might have justified a different choice. As the story unfolded, the room grew remarkably still. Many guests lowered their eyes in reflection. Others looked toward Ethan with expressions of admiration. Bradley's voice remained calm. "Character reveals itself when nobody is watching," he said. "Integrity matters most when there is an easier path available." The silence that followed carried more weight than applause ever could. Then Bradley looked directly toward Ethan. "Yesterday, a 14-year-old boy reminded me what true wealth looks like." This time the audience rose to its feet. The applause began softly before growing throughout the ballroom. Ethan froze. The sound echoed beneath the chandeliers and across the glass walls overlooking the city. Yet what moved him most was not the applause itself. It was the respect behind it. As he stood there beneath the warm lights, surrounded by strangers who now saw his value, Ethan realized something profound. The opportunity being offered was not merely a chance to change his own future. It was proof that one honest decision could inspire an entire room to believe in goodness again. The applause continued for several moments before gradually fading into a warm, respectful silence. Ethan Johnson stood beneath the glow of the chandeliers, surrounded by people who had spent their lives measuring success through numbers, titles, and achievements. Yet in that moment, none of those things seemed to matter as much as a simple decision made by a 14-year-old boy on a rainy sidewalk. The city lights shimmered beyond the glass walls behind him, reflecting across the river like scattered stars. Ethan looked around the ballroom and felt something unfamiliar settle inside him. For years, he had moved through life unnoticed. He had learned how to become invisible. Invisible to busy commuters. Invisible to people passing on sidewalks. Invisible to those who saw his circumstances before they saw him. Tonight was different. Tonight people saw him. Not because of money. Not because of status. Because of character. Bradley Morgan stepped down from the stage and walked toward him. The room remained quiet, watching the interaction. Bradley extended his hand. Ethan looked at it for a moment before shaking it firmly. The gesture seemed simple, yet everyone understood its meaning. 24 hours earlier they had stood on opposite sides of a doorway separated by wealth, experience, and assumptions. Now they stood as two people connected by mutual respect. Bradley smiled. "Thank you," he said quietly. Ethan shook his head. "Slightly." "For what?" Bradley glanced toward the audience before answering. "For reminding me that integrity still exists." The words lingered between them. Around the ballroom, conversations slowly resumed. Guests returned to their tables. The piano player began another soft melody. Yet the atmosphere felt different now. Lighter. More hopeful. Throughout the remainder of the evening, people approached Ethan not with sympathy but with encouragement. Educators offered support. Community leaders shared opportunities. Several donors quietly pledged additional funding for youth programs after hearing his story. One honest decision had already begun creating opportunities for others. Later that night, after the event ended and the guests departed, Ethan stepped outside onto a terrace overlooking the river. The air was cool and peaceful. Far below, reflections from streetlights danced across the water. The city seemed quieter now. Bradley joined him a few moments later. Neither spoke immediately. They simply stood together looking across the skyline. Finally, Bradley handed Ethan a small envelope. "You can open it tomorrow," he said. Ethan accepted it carefully. "What is it?" Bradley smiled. "Part of your future." Ethan laughed softly. It was the first completely relaxed laugh Bradley had heard from him. For a moment neither thought about the wallet. Neither thought about the attention or the applause. They simply appreciated the quiet. The river flowed steadily beneath the lights. The city continued moving around them. Somewhere in the distance a train horn echoed through the night. Eventually Ethan looked back toward the building. Through the glass walls he could still see staff cleaning tables and turning off lights. The evening was ending. A new chapter was beginning. As they prepared to leave, Ethan glanced one final time across the skyline. Less than 2 days earlier he had been searching sidewalks beneath those same buildings. Now he was leaving with hope, stability, and opportunities he had never imagined. Yet the most important thing about him had not changed. His honesty remained the same. His character remained the same. And perhaps that was the true lesson. Hidden within the story, wealth had not transformed Ethan Johnson. Integrity had revealed him. The city lights reflected across the river as he walked toward the waiting vehicle beside Bradley Morgan. And for the first time in a very long while, the future felt brighter than the night behind him.